الحقيقة الواحد فخور بالحضور وبالمجهود اللي عاملاه الأستاذة الدكتورة هالة مكين في الموضوع بتاع سكيب اللي هو هنبدأ أول إعداد فيه. والحقيقة برضو شرفني إن في أخوة أصدقاء وزملاء من كليات تانية وجامعات تانية ومن بلاد شقيقة علينا موجودين برضو عشان يساعدوا أبنائنا الطلبة في موضوع اللي هو سكيب أليكس اللي هي قامت بإعداده الأستاذة الدكتورة هالة مكين. وعشان بس احنا متأخرين ونعرف هنبدأ نقول أول محاضرة هيشرفنا فيها الأخ العزيز الأستاذ الدكتور سعيد الغامدي. وسعيد الغامدي هو رئيس الجمعية العربية للكلى وزراعتها، وهو برضو كان رئيس الجمعية السعودية للكلى وزراعتها، وهو أستاذ في جامعة الملك عبد العزيز في الرياض، وله نشاط كبير مينلي في نيفرولوجي وبعد كده في دياليسيس والترانسبلانتيشن. والحقيقة يعني هم رغم من الانشغال الشديد وموسم الحج وهو برضه الناس اللي بتشارك فيه، فشاركنا ان هو حضر عندنا في اسكندريه. وهو برضه هيتكلم على السي كي دي، برضه السي كي دي اللي هو اسمه كرونيك كيدني ديزيز، بس هي كان الاول كرونيك نفيلير بقى اسمها سي كي دي. وهو هيتكلم على البيردن اوف سي كي دي as a non-communicable disease. أستاذ الدكتور سعيد الغامدي.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. أشكر الأستاذ الدكتور صلاح نجا على الانترودكشن، وأنا يسعدني أكون في الإسكندرية، وهي ثاني زيارة لي زرتها قبل 4 سنوات كانت في سياحة مع العائلة. حقيقة أعتبر من مصر الوطني الثاني مكان الأول، ولي أصدقاء كثير هنا، وأشكر الله الحمد لله قابلت مجموعة منهم الآن، ويسعدني أكون معكم. وأحب أن أشكر الدكتور هالة مكين for this great project. She spoke with me almost 2 months ago, I think, I'm not sure where, and she introduced about it. She wants to do this thing, and I'm really glad to see the young blood in front of me. وهذا عصر الشباب الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأنا أحييكم بكل قلبي على مجهودكم وعلى مشاركتكم، لكم تحية خاصة من قلبي. We'll talk about burden of CKD. In this presentation, I'll talk about CKD and staging disease, the importance and magnitude of the issue, and the incidence and prevalence of kidney disease, and renal replacement therapy من ناحية renal peritoneal dialysis, hemodialysis, and renal transplantation, and what challenges we are facing. If we talk about CKD, CKD, if you look at chronic kidney disease, new type has been introduced by National Kidney Foundation almost 15 years ago, and it affects actually, there's been a study where they did field survey, and they show that about 11% of the population at risk of chronic kidney disease. And I'll show you some data about this one. Like, if you look at the patient who had end-stage disease will require renal replacement therapy, they're less than 0.2%, fortunately. Like, there's a big gap between 0.2% of the end-stage disease and the 11% who are at CKD, which tells you that the majority of the patients, either they die before they reach end-stage disease, or they continue for some time, but at the end, that the majority of the 11% they will die before each day, because the comorbid conditions are so great in this patient population. And I'll show you some data about this one. You have to understand that the CKD in general is associated with high cost. And the cost is really quite magnificent to the extent that really a burden by itself. Not only the disease, the cost of treating the disease is quite burden on the health authorities. And I have to show you that there is exponential increase in the incidence and prevalence of CKD in any population take, especially in the third world. This is actually a famous study by Koresh, which has shown that if you look at it, when we are looking at this is actually the stage disease. It's almost 0.2%. It's like the tip of the iceberg. But most of the berg is underneath the sea. If you look at stage, somebody will talk about CKD stages, but stage 5, which means that patients that are needing renal replacement therapy. So this 0.2%, but the majority of the patients from stage 1 to 4 is beneath the sea level, and actually they are almost more than 10%. So the majority of the patients CKD is not seen, and you don't see them. That's why Dr. Halwaki wants to look at these patient population. So just to remind you that this patient with huge number at risk and they die early, okay, we have to start looking at them and try to pick them up. If you look at actually the mortality is really quite high. This actually study showed that the risk of death is really associated with the glomerular filtration rate. So the lower GFR, the higher the mortality. And this study has shown that patients with GFR less than 15 means at approaching CKD5 or on stage, they are the highest mortality. And the lowest mortality is CKD1. And most of the death is due to the cardiovascular morbidity and mortality. And this study also shown that 36% they have actually cardiovascular events with their GFR less than 15%. So they associate with high morbidity, high mortality, and high cardiovascular disease. We go here actually see that the cardiac disease is quite prevalent in those patients. If you take any patient population patient who are approaching end-stage disease, at least 50% they have coronary artery disease at that time. About 40% they have left ventricular hypertrophy. Dilated left ventricular hypertrophy 20%. Systolic left ventricular failure about 80%. And vascular disease, peripheral vascular disease almost 10%. So it's really quite prevalent other comorbid conditions. And the risk of heart disease is high because actually most of the patients they have 80% they have hypertension. About 40% they have diabetes. And 80% they have homocystinemia, hyperhomocystinemia, which is considered non-traditional risk factor of coronary artery disease. And 50% have hyperlipidemia. So you look at this patient population, they have high comorbid condition which can lead to cardiovascular morbidity and mortality. I'll just very brief, I know the time is relevant here, that we talk about the prevalence in Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, actually, if you look at all the world, if you look at state in Saudi Arabia, the incidence of end-stage per million population is increasing from almost 100, almost 25 years, 26 years ago, now approaching almost 270, 280 per population. So more than doubled over the last 25 years in America. This is similar to other countries, and Saudi Arabia is not an exception. And we actually, in Saudi Arabia, we are much better than America. America almost 270, 280 at least patients in the million population. In Saudi Arabia, almost 170. This is the last data we have. So 170 million population, but we have about 750 patients per million population. They are on dialysis. This actually, if you look at the need for renal replacement therapy, when I talk renal replacement therapy, is hemodialysis, peritoneal dialysis, and renal transplantation. It's increased with over the years, over the last 10 years. So there's an exponential increase, rise in the need for dialysis, PT, hemo, or transplantation. This is actually, if you look at Saudi Arabia, the renal dialysis, we started actually the first time dialysis in 1971 in Riyadh by one dialysis center, then Jeddah, second dialysis center. But look at now we have a huge number of patients. This is the population I think because increasing number of patients dialysis. Now we almost have 14,000 patients on dialysis. So really quite increasing with time, and they project that is 7 to 10% increments every year on the number of prevalent patients on dialysis. This means that every patient, every year, that we have about 7 to 10% increase from the year before on the number of patients requiring renal replacement therapy. This is actually the cost for that one in Saudi Arabia is the same like everywhere. We start to become like American. Before, we used to have glomerulonephritis and hypertension. Unfortunately, right now, for globalization, America is 40%, we are 40%. We have diabetes, hypertension. So number two causes constitute almost 70% of patients requiring dialysis, which is diabetes and hypertension. So if you control diabetes, hypertension, you could control 70% of the risk factor for developing CKD and end-stage disease. So we have only 2 diseases we have to look at as a major primary cause for it. The other, like glomerulonephritis or others, really becoming less and less. This is actually a very nice study showing that over the years, for example, here cystic disease, they don't change. Glomerulonephritis don't change. But what hasn't changed? Hypertensive nephropathy and diabetic nephropathy. And that's why the number of patients reaching dialysis from the cause from cystic disease is the same, from glomerular disease is the same, but from actually diabetes and hypertension is increasing. So it tells you that we have 2 major enemies, diabetes and hypertension. This actually is a study from SCOT. SCOT stands for Saudi Center for Organ Transplantation, where all the data comes out of Saudi Arabia for the kidney disease goes there. They actually have shown that at least 34% of the cases approaching dialysis due to hypertension nephropathy and almost 30% diabetes. But we have data showing 40% actually more than this one. There's actually a study by Scott himself, and actually interesting. They look at diabetes and hypertension, look at all patients they are on dialysis, and they look at actually what's about systemic prevalence of diabetes and hypertension. To your surprise, only 25% of the patients who are on dialysis, they don't have diabetes or hypertension. Means that 75% of the patients on dialysis, they are either diabetic, hypertensive, or both. The mortality in Saudi Arabia, if you look at almost 50% of the patients who reach end-stage disease and require dialysis, PE, hemodialysis, peritoneal dialysis, or transplantation, 52% of the patients they are on hemodialysis. They are about 42% on transplantation and only 5% on peritoneal dialysis. But if you take dialysis alone itself only, either heme or PE, 90% hemodialysis, 10% peritoneal dialysis. And this is actually the curve in Saudi Arabia, showing that this one actually is transplantation, the green is hemodialysis, and red are peritoneal dialysis. And you can see that increase in the number of transplantation, hemodialysis, peritoneal dialysis with time. So every year there is more and more patients added to the list. Now, this actually, I'll tell you this simple term, that we have actually 3 areas in Saudi Arabia for treatment. We have the government hospital, we have the private hospital, but we have a very good example called charity units. That's why I'm bringing this issue to you, because you know that actually even governments in Saudi Arabia have good budget, they cannot support healthcare. And that's why charity has to come in to him. And we have actually looked that almost 15% of dialysis patients are dialyzed through charity units, especially for in Saudi. And this actually is the government hospital in Saudi, Jeddah, where actually we have very good program for hemodialysis, and this the purple is peritoneal dialysis. So some hospitals even have almost 40% of their patients on peritoneal dialysis. This is a charity in Jeddah, slide showing 4 units. But I can assure you, we have opened the 5th one recently, so we have 5 units for hemodialysis, more than 120 machines dialysis those patients. Right. Hemodialysis in Saudi Arabia, this actually showing that, as I said earlier on, that every year there's a great number of patients of hemodialysis. Every year there is at least 1,000 patients added to hemodialysis every year. There's actually dialysis center in Saudi Arabia is increasing very significantly. We have reached to almost 180 centers for dialysis and scattered all over the kingdom. And this actually shows you that every year there's more and more patients added to hemo and PTA transplantation. The interesting thing I want to show you this one that look at most of the patients at what age group. Most of the patients in dialysis from age 25 to age 56. So the majority of the patients in the most protective life. And you have to remember that each one who develops dialysis in this patient, they are behind them one big family. So it means that when those patients in that age group are affected, all through their family they are affected. So we are not treating only that patient, we are treating also the family. This is actually another slide showing that the majority of the patients here actually are the most protective age group. Well, I don't talk about hepatitis, it's already becoming this and this, but this is actually, I'm introducing the principle of peritoneal dialysis here. I'm sure that Professor and others have major impact in this one, but I'll tell you that it's one of the ways we have to treat our patient peritoneal dialysis under utilize mode of therapy. Unfortunately, Saudi Arabia have increased significantly, and I have from the data which we're seeing right now, we are increasing to 1,400 patients per kingdom. This is the peritoneal dialysis, and of course, peritoneal dialysis mostly used by children, but when Saudi Arabia only 70% of peritoneal children, the majority, 80% are adult population. Transplantation in Saudi Arabia, well, actually, we are having a look, but this is actually survival care for transplantation. So, transplant is the best way to treat your end-stage disease, treatment-wise. And look, actually here, for example, this is the hemodialysis. This is survival over 5 years. Okay, so every year they will start by 95%, but every year they die. To the end, actually, after 10 years maximum, you have only 40% of the patient are surviving. 60 they die. Transplantation to no, actually a better survival care. With the years, their survival is not different much from general population. Slightly different, but it's much better. You could see the contrast quite significant between transplantation and hemodialysis. This is another slide showing the transplant in Saudi Arabia, how good, and most of the cases actually in Saudi Arabia here are living related. The blue means the relatives donate to their relatives, and here actually you look at the deceased donor cadaveric or dead people, and in Saudi Arabia it's becoming more and more prevalent. We have deceased donor transplantation. Let's actually look at how much we take every year from dead donor. We are taking almost 166 kidneys every year. Kidney transplantation, this is actually, I want to bring this issue to you, that this is actually a deceased donor. We have almost 160 per year in Saudi Arabia, and almost 50 living related donors. But to look at this living unrelated means commercial transplantation done outside Saudi Arabia, almost more same number of the deceased donor and living related. Tells you that the major problem, which is the living unrelated transplantation or the commercial transplantation done outside the kingdom, and unfortunately Saudi Arabians, they seek that kind of transplantation. This is actually a very effective brain death program for harvesting from dead brain dead people. And we actually, over the last 25 years, we have received more than 1,130 organs. This actually division survival and transplantation much better. It's really great compared to any other modalities. And this is the Kaplan-Meier survival care. I've just finished from here at that time. So let's go to this. Actually, one slide showing that we have this direct care showing increasing number of patients on wait listing for transplantation, but the number of transplantation is not increasing. It tells you that we have a big gap between the wait listed and the transplantation. This is the commercial transplantation done everywhere, unfortunately, including Philippines, Pakistan, and this is actually the execution in China, where if you want a kidney, it's available anytime you want. Just execute somebody for you, give you that kidney. Right, and this is very quite common in Pakistan, unfortunately. So this led to what you call Istanbul Declaration, which really stands against ethical transplantation, which is an attempt to ban transplant commercialization on the basis of ethical and violates the principle of human dignity, equity, and justice. So actually, I'm one of the persons who really against that one and stands for Istanbul Declaration. Mortality in Saudi Arabia regarding the dialysis is much better than the rest of the world, honestly, like Europe. If you look at here, for example, Brazil, 23%, America, 80% mortality, first year mortality, Europe, almost 40%, Japan, and Saudi Arabia, about 45% first year mortality. Right. Challenges is the last issue, which is one touch. Challenges of CKD and solution. The challenge actually we are facing right now that increase the incidence and prevalence of CKD with the associated demand on resources and human power. We still have high prevalence of hepatitis C. There's a gap between number of transplanted patients versus waitlisted patients. Living on a retinal transplant is a major challenge in Saudi Arabia. But we have to remember one thing, that due to the high prevalence of diabetes and hypertension, we have seen increased number of CKD. As I explained earlier on, due to increased number of diabetes and hypertension. By the way, when I remember when I was medical school, same like you, almost 20 quarter century ago, At that time, the prevalence of diabetes in Saudi Arabia almost was 4%. Right now, 20%. So it tells you how things are changing. Same like Spain. I mean, everywhere that increasing diabetes, hypertension, you will face with increasing hypertension. So that's why, and unfortunately, there is absence of effective screening program anywhere. Honestly, I can see an absence of program which takes risk factors modification and failure in providing adequate optimal care to diabetic and hypertensive patients. So simply, there is no strategy. Solution: we need actually CKD clinic, pre-dialysis clinic. We need implement integrated care approach. Need more resources, improve disease organization, and improve immunity. And actually, this actually tells you how much we know. In conclusion, I would say that increasing incidence of prevalence of CKD due to increased incidence of prevalence of diabetes and hypertension, this will lead to increased morbidity and mortality and a huge demand on healthcare resources. We need measures to invest in primary screening program and on preventive measures. The gap between transplant and weight tested in the state need to be addressed with plan strategy to increase living related and disease donor transfusion. Thank you very much.